You mentioned there the atrocities that we're seeing on the ground. You mentioned there that we were seeing atrocities on the ground. I think we've all been horrified by the images we're starting to see, but I think the lessons of Syria is that there is evidently much worse to come. What is our plan to prevent atrocities in the next coming days, the next 48 hours? And what red lines or repercussions are there for the continued use of cluster bombs, for thermobaric weapons, and ultimately that we have to plan for chemical weapons and what our response will be to those?
Well, I fear that you are absolutely correct in assessing that because the plan is not going according to what Vladimir Putin had set out, that we are likely to see worse and worse ammunition being used and techniques. I mean, we saw the reckless attack on a nuclear power plant. We are seeing the use of cluster weapons. We are likely to see a very, very serious attack on Kiev, and that is extremely, extremely concerning. And we are calling it out. We've already asked the ICC to investigate the potential that war crimes have been committed. We're doing all we can to accelerate the provision of a humanitarian corridor, but we're looking at a barbaric prosecution of war by a dictator, and that is unfortunately the position we're in. And I think we need to be prepared for this to draw out longer term. A lot of these economic sanctions I've talked about only work over time. I think, though, that what we have seen is the Ukrainians are prepared to fight, and that even if there is success in taking the cities, even if there is success of Russia being able to occupy some or broader parts of Ukraine, the Ukrainian people are not going to give up. And ultimately, this will be a failure for Putin. But what is so horrific is this failure is going to end in so much tragedy. And not just the appalling tragedy that we're seeing visited on the Ukrainian people, the appalling tragedy for the Russian soldiers who've been sent in. And, the reports of thousands of soldiers already have been killed. And this will hit the Russian population as well.
And the difficulty is no amount of heroism survives in the face of chemical weapons use, or thermobarics or any others. Have we yet put in place post-chemical weapon exposure plans so we can make sure we can send in that appropriate aid? But also, will we consider, and I recognise it's unlikely to be able to confirm this today in a public setting, but meaningful repercussions, cyber strikes at the heart of Russian critical national infrastructure that are fully deniable, actions such as that, because Putin has already declared that he sees us arming the Ukrainians as an act of war, that our sanctions are in essence. We cannot allow the Ukrainian people's bravery to be the stalwart against such weapons use. There have to be repercussions.
There will be repercussions, and there's been a referral already to the International Criminal Court, and it's being investigated, and there are already numerous atrocities that have been committed that are being investigated. Of course, we're doing all we can to support the Ukrainians. I'm working very, very closely with the Ministry of Defence and the Ukrainian government. In fact, on the day of the invasion, Ben Wallace and I had a call with our counterparts to coordinate how we support Ukraine, and we're working through NATO with our international allies on this.
I think my desperate ask would be that we know that no amount of threatening of legal action is going to stop him. So there must be some sort of agreement, behind the scenes, secretive, whatever it needs to be, deniable, fully deniable, or actions should we see continued atrocities, particularly those nature. This takes me to a wider point, which is, for a long time I've talked about atrocity prevention with the Foreign Office not being what it should be. We've only just stood up the conflict centre, which took many months of lobbying for. Or do we have an atrocity prevention? Is it time for an atrocity prevention strategy across the whole of the Foreign Office, but also for every single post to have one, a framework that they can apply within their own post? Because otherwise we're not going to see the sort of atrocity prevention flagging early enough. We're not going to know exactly what sort of preventative and reactionary measures actually stop atrocities from going further and further and further. And this is something meaningful that global Britain could do, which is a lead on atrocity prevention around the world, but it needs an institutional change within the heart of the department.
I agree with your point on atrocity prevention. what we are facing in Ukraine is, a dictator whose invasion plan hasn't worked. It hasn't been as fast as he would hope to take the cities, and he is turning to more and more extreme measures. And whilst we're doing all we can to support with defensive weaponry, with humanitarian support, including some of the issues you've covered, Alicia, we are not in a position where NATO is getting directly involved. That is the stark reality of the situation we're in, and it's appalling, it's unconscionable. But we have seen Putin prepared to use those types of weapons in other countries. That is the horrific reality of the situation we're dealing with.
Would be, however, and apologies, Chair, this is my last point in this question. The fact is the Foreign Office is not set up in any way to have a framework. So it essentially, when I worked on the Syria desk and the Iraq desk and the counter-terrorism desk, you were expected to suddenly become an expert in atrocity prevention when we were already so far down the line of recognising atrocities were in place that there was no meaningful way to stop them, to limit the bloodshed, to take action. We could meaningfully have, and this happens, Ukraine, Xinjiang, Burma, Syria, you name it. If the Foreign Office was to use its conflict centre to create a framework and to have framework for atrocity prevention, where every post has to have an atrocity prevention strategy, where we have a core set of expertise, be it sanctions, counter-disinformation, military, humanitarian, so on, a core set of resource set in the centre of the department, we would see earlier flagging of atrocities. We would see desks not struggling to suddenly become experts in atrocity prevention, but being able to pull on a central resource, and we would end up with earlier flagging of potential atrocities and earlier stopping of them.
I think we have been flagging atrocities pretty assiduously during this campaign and collecting evidence. The issue is that Putin is pursuing these...
But this isn't about Ukraine, this is about long-term, how we fundamentally change the Foreign Office internal approach to atrocities, because it has been failing time and time again, because we do not have the expertise or the resources or the frameworks in place to support people. It's too late for Ukraine, but what we could do is look at now preparing posts to be able to support for future atrocity prevention.
It's certainly something I'll look at.
Thank you.
You want to?